So for me, I always kind of start with the numbers. I think a lot of brands that I talk to, if I'm consulting, I mean, they're just straight running Facebook ads or running Google ads. Or how are you thinking about this from a strategic point of view at a really high level? Are you building a marketing machine in any way, right? Do you have a plan for repurchase? Do you have a plan for continued communication? Do you have a product that can address that or add to AOV, right? I'll take a lot of that sort of thinking at a high level and start to drill into the numbers around, okay, what is the lowest contribution margin my leadership is comfortable with, right? And then how do I back into the channel plan?
You're listening to the Ecommerce Influence Podcast with Austin Bronner and Andrew Foxwell. If you want honest, transparent, and tangible results that deliver lasting value and revenue, this is your podcast.
You may know Just Uno for pop-ups, but if you haven't checked them out recently, they're a full-blown conversion rate optimization platform. Yes, they've got pop-ups, but also they've got AI product recommendations, exit offers, Facebook Messenger, SMS, capture, and a lot more. Brands like Pure Vita Bracelets, Rothy's, and Movement use Just Uno to capture and nurture their traffic all the way to conversion. I recommend Just Uno to my clients as a top conversion rate optimization tool. Now, you can use AI cross-sells and upsells directly in-page or in-cart with Just Uno Plus for higher average order value. Just Uno Commerce AI takes in your product catalog and then will display smart recommendations based on visitor behavior. If you want to create a seamless experience from offsite all the way to onsite with unified messaging, you got to check out Just Uno. Head over to justuno.com/influence to learn more. That's justuno.com/influence.
Are you struggling to keep track of all your content? As a growing brand, managing content is difficult because it comes in many forms, has countless sources and destinations, and is ever-changing. For more than 20 years, Widen has helped solve these challenges. Use Widen's cloud-based software to bring your photos, videos, copy, and product specs together, and then send them anywhere to quickly support your marketing and sales channels. Brands like Trek, Trunk Club, and New Balance use Widen to take control of their narrative with up-to-date, reusable content, and you can as well. Head over to ecommerceinfluence.com/Widen, WIDEN, for a free demo.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Ecommerce Influence Podcast. My name is Austin Bronner.
And I'm Andrew Foxwell. I tell you, Austin, I have been absolutely loving your emails lately. You have hit a stride. They are so helpful. I'm not just blowing smoke. They are so interesting. They're so genuinely you. Honestly, if people are listening to this and you're not subscribed, how do you get subscribed to your emails?
So we just built a page actually to make it easier. So you can go to brandgrowthexperts.com/newsletter.
Okay.
And sign up. I usually send out one on Thursday and maybe one on another day of the week, depending on how much time I've got and depending on what's happening in the world and what needs to be addressed. Right. But yeah, check it out. If you guys are not on the email list, I think we've got about 4,500, something like that right now, and mostly e-commerce business owners and marketers. So that's a good spot. And you've also got a newly launched email list. Tell us about it.
So we decided one of these things that's crazy, right? Is keeping up with the Facebook and Instagram ad news. And even a little bit of TikTok, a little bit of Snapchat. It's hard to know. So when I was on sort of family leave, I was having Shane, who edits this podcast, put together a kind of a weekly, like, hey, here's what happened on Twitter and in the Facebook groups and what Facebook is saying publicly on a whole bunch of stuff related to ads directly for direct-to-consumer businesses and advertisers. So we just started putting it in a newsletter, we've been getting great feedback on it, and we have a really strong about 900 people there, and you can check it out foxwelldigital.com/email and sign up. We'd love to have you, but it's been really fun to kind of like put it all together in one place. But actually, one of the people that I quoted in a recent newsletter is who is our guest today, Jesse Semchuck from Traeger Grills, the director of acquisition for Traeger Grills. Just a wonderful guy that I have gotten to know on Twitter, and I know you have as well. And I'm excited to have him here.
I'm really excited. I am a pellet grill owner, and I would consider myself somewhat of a fanatic of a smoking fanatic during this time of quarantine. It was kind of one of my big projects: ribs, chicken, all those different things. It's been a lot of fun. So and then I got deep in their retargeting funnel, and it's been interesting to see they're doing some really cool stuff. And Jesse goes into a little bit of that and how he thinks also holistically about the marketing funnel. If you are running a business and are ready to kind of take it to the next level, like you've had a lot of success growing on Facebook and Instagram, I feel like this is a really good episode to give you a viewpoint into what's possible past paid social. So let's bring him in.
Jesse, we're so glad to have you on the show. For those people that don't know who you are and your background, can you give people a background of what you do at Traeger and also your experience previously at Purple Mattresses too? Because I think both of those things are really interesting.
Sure. At Traeger, I'm the director of acquisition, so I have pretty much anything digital, but my team's scope also goes into traditional channels, TV, radio, anything on the sort of prospecting side, podcast side. So my team sort of covers all of it. And then we work with a few different agencies. And before that, I was at Purple Mattress, where I was covering a lot of the programmatic efforts on Google, a lot of the SEO efforts, affiliate, and basically everything that wasn't paid social.
Okay, so quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. My team covers most marketing efforts at Traeger. We've been really excited to kind of build it out over the last year. When I started, Traeger really wasn't doing a lot of digital marketing. We had a 30-minute infomercial that they'd run for a few years on broadcast TV. Mm-hmm. And after running the same infomercial for a few years, wouldn't you know it, it stopped working. And they decided, well, we'd better jump into digital. And so the difference being, it's been just really fun to sort of build that up from scratch and not have to step into a big mess left behind by someone else. I'm not saying that was the case at Purple, but certainly companies before that, build it out the right way without a lot of waste in the spend.
It's super interesting. I was telling you before we hopped on that I'm deep in your guys' retargeting funnel right now, just watching kind of the different ways you approach it. It's really, really interesting. You've got, YouTube, you've got all these different campaigns running that kind of all hop into this holistic experience that you can learn more about Traeger. What has been something that you've learned about the difference between selling mattresses and selling smokers?
Well, the biggest thing is just selling smokers is not as broad of an audience. So when we were selling mattresses, right, we could pretty much target based on age and maybe income. And you're probably going to have someone who probably sleeps on a mattress in the United States, right? Everyone sleeps. A large percentage of homes own a grill, but then to add the sort of layer of Traeger on top of it, we know that we want to target a higher HHI or household income because it's a higher price point than a traditional grill. You can go buy a grill at a big box store for $200, a propane grill. A smoker or a pellet grill is really different in that it sort of is more like a convection oven, like an outdoor oven, regulates your heat within the smoker through a computer controlled system that's connected to Wi-Fi, that's connected to the app. And so it's more money, right? It's $1,000 on average for one of our grills. And we know that, less people are going to be qualified for that. And if you're buying a Traeger, it's probably not your first grill, right? You probably already owned a lower priced grill. And we have to sort of qualify at the top of our funnel based on some variables like home ownership and income.
One thing just right out of the gates that I'm curious about before we even get into more questions is what are you excited about that's actually working well for Traeger right now?
Well, I think what's been interesting is when I came in, I had this mindset of sort of more of a D2C mindset, right? Having worked at Purple, thinking, well, maybe we need 70 or 80% of our mix to be on the prospecting side for education. And what I've learned at Traeger is that it's just such an advantage to be in so many retail stores. Like Traeger is in Home Depot, Ace, Costco's around the country. We're in 10,000 stores. And so having that base already built up before I stepped in is just a massive advantage. And so working with our retail partners, working with, like this morning, I was on a call with, Home Depot's digital team and Ace Hardware's digital team this morning. And so talking through with them and figuring out, okay, what is the holistic mix of marketing spend across all of these channels? And can I give some of these retail partners, more money that works in a sort of hand-in-hand way with our digital spend? And so what I found that's working really well, just to circle back to your original question, is like, one, prospecting based on qualifiers across as many channels as we can, but also really honing in and optimizing the channels and the full funnel of sort of the more traditional digital channels like your Facebooks and Googles.
Could you have kind of a picture of maybe the size of your team and like the I think it's really good to give a perspective of how large your organization is, what your team looks like, and how you kind of manage all this. Because I feel like often lots of direct to consumer brands, they kind of get stuck, like you were mentioning, maybe 70-80% on prospecting, and then like the vast majority of that on paid social. And they're looking for this like next level. What does your team look like? How do you kind of manage that? And how do you pair that also with outside agencies?
So yeah, we have a couple of channels where there are certain things within a channel that we might not have the resources for. So my team is myself and 3 others, essentially, adding to that quickly. But so I consider us to be a relatively small team based on the amount of spend we have. So we're going to be adding to that, but so we need to lean on our partners pretty heavily. So we do lean on our partners within channel to help. Certainly not on the ones where we feel like we need in-house expertise, like your Facebooks or Googles, but there are channels that will help you run things. And as long as you have expertise in-house that can say, look, we are going to require a viewability rate, or we want this to be a non-skippable video view, or whatever it is for that channel, I think you can kind of hold their feet to the fire and make sure, they know that you're going to hold them accountable.
I think it's kind of that D2C thinking that you and I talked about before, of saying, a lot of D2C brands only focus on only a couple of channels. And one thing you commented on was shifting into thinking about kind of a holistic brand building plan where you're trying to scale spend on sometimes less trackable channels.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even begin to think about this, right? Like in terms of attribution, in terms of digital growth and contribution margin targets, stuff like that?
So for me, I always kind of start with the numbers. I think a lot of brands that I talk to, if I'm consulting, I mean, they're just straight running Facebook ads or running Google ads, or, how are you thinking about this from a strategic point of view at a really high level? Are you building a marketing machine in any way, right? Do you have a plan for repurchase? Do you have a plan for continued communication? Do you have a product that can address that or add to AOV, right? I'll take a lot of that sort of thinking at a high level and start to drill into the numbers around, okay, what is the lowest contribution margin my business, my leadership is comfortable with, right? How do I gain trust with my leadership internally? And then how do I back into the channel plan, right? We're on a lot of channels, but not as many as like a company of our size maybe would be. And I think years ago, I often thought, well, digital marketing isn't one thing, it's everything. And I think as I've gotten a little bit older, I realize I'm probably going to, die early if I have that mindset. You really have to like pick and choose your 8 to 12 channels, right, that are really going to work for your brand and your customer, and figure out how you're going to optimize those over time.
I think that's a absolutely incredible point, that you have to pick and choose. And I see that consistently over time, where people are overwhelmed because they're trying to do all channels. And what that leads to is like the inability to do any channel well. How do you guys think about your channels? How did you think about when you started? How did you think about adding new channels, and what does your kind of mix of marketing channels look like with your, the relatively small team that you're talking about?
So we think about things in terms of top, mid, and bottom funnel. Basically, we have a number of streaming, channels that we run on the top of the funnel. So when I think about prospecting, to me, that's anyone who's never visited our website and never bought a product from us, never downloaded our app. We have no engagement with that customer. We want to get in front of as many potential customers as possible. So we're looking for channels that can help us do that en masse without, doing it across 20 different channels that do streaming video. So we're certainly, heavy on Amazon and heavy on YouTube, and Hulu and Roku. We're actually advertising it right now as well. But I mean, and many of the traditional digital channels are also sort of top of funnel channels like your Facebooks and whatnot. So like I think about things in those three different sections of the funnel, and then figure out what is the right messaging throughout, how long do they need to be in the funnel, and work with our consumer sort of insights team internally the whole time to figure out who is this customer, does this track, what are we hearing from our other partners outside to say, okay, well, what we're seeing is that example being like Home Depot may tell us that, well, we know that a Traeger customer is interested in high-end appliances and outdoor gardening, right? Am I advertising to those audiences? Do I have better audiences within Google that I can then disseminate throughout the other channels? So for us, like really it starts with audience and then what we think the kind of funnel is based on post-purchase survey data that we've collected over the last year.
So a lot of it is attributable to that post-purchase survey data that you're kind of backing that in. Do you find that people are, I mean, like discovery wise, I think people are always interested, a lot of the D2C companies, just like I said, starting with a Facebook, and they're not even starting with a video view. They're going to start with conversion ads, and, they're not necessarily even thinking about something as top funnel as a video view. From a discovery standpoint, a smoker and a pellet grill it's something that requires like a certain level of nerdery. Is that a word? And
Sure.
somebody like really getting into the weeds to understand it, and researching pros and cons of it. Where does that discovery take place? Is it that you found? Is it mostly on? Is it on YouTube? Is it on Facebook? Is it on display? Or is it kind of in all of those places? And you're then experimenting with things like Hulu, et cetera.
Yeah, it starts in kind of all of those places, quite honestly. And we have a sort of a system we've built that allows us to look at the roll up of the contribution margin across all of those channels. And for some channels, I expect little to no ROAS, right? But what I do expect out of a channel like a YouTube is, I don't say no ROAS, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but I do expect high view through rates. I expect low, CPVs. I expect, there are different sort of metrics that matter across these channels. And I think that's where a lot of like smaller companies kind of get hung up, is that you might have an amazing view rate on a video that is contributing to the return on other channels on Facebook retargeting or whatever, but you might pause it because within the first week you didn't see an amazing return or similar returns. You just have to learn that each of these channels is going to operate a little bit independently in terms of how they think about or what kind of data they're collecting, but also it's all holistic. Like I know that if I spend more to the right audience that we've identified at the top of the funnel, my retargeting is going to do better at the bottom of the funnel. It's just that simple. And I think most brands, either they don't have the cash or they're not willing to outlay the time to really get at those learnings.
I think that's a really good point. That is the thing that kind of can hold people back seemingly from taking the next step, is being able to look at it a little bit more holistically and understand, like you said, there may be a video that people watch that really is like a convincing video explaining what a Traeger is that leads to a purchase later on. But if that's not giving ROAS, people might turn it off, even though that's a huge part of the process. I think about breaking down how people think about selling different products, because there's, in one case, a lot of people out there that are kind of preaching like one method to sell something, when everything is dependent on your product. And I think about, I have a pellet smoker, and I went through the whole process of learning about it. It takes a long time to figure out, to make sure, is this the right one for you? All these different questions. And ultimately, I think mattresses are similar in the sense you need to do a little bit of research to be able to figure out what you want. When you're looking at selling a pellet smoker and you compare that to somebody who's got a product that is a lot more simple, how does somebody determine when's the right time to invest in like a full funnel holistic view versus just push on a few levers? I think that's an interesting question that I don't know the answer to.
I think if you have uh, like for us, it's a pretty simple decision, right? Because we're in so many retail stores, and our big push for the year is sort of brand awareness, right? And pellet grill awareness, just generally. Most people have probably walked by a Traeger and thought it was just a regular grill, right? So for us, it's an easy decision. I think for most companies, though, obviously start dinging the cash register, and then as those, if you're doing well from a ROAS perspective, and start investing in the top of the funnel, because once you start seeing results um, at the lower end of things, Facebook retargeting or whatever, you're going to be able to identify who those audiences are through Google. Go look at your conversion pixel data within Google. It'll tell you based on the snapshot of the time frame you're looking at who that customer is. Are they interested in traveling? Are they a business news reader? Who is that? Start to identify these profiles, and then go out and invest in the top of the funnel, but not until you have some data over the course of probably 3-6 months worth of learnings to sort of start to formulate those profiles.
Yeah, that makes me think of that one strategy from Ryan Kolvach, who is a Facebook advertiser, a digital advertiser, a friend of the pod, who always would recommend going and looking in your Google in-market segments and then taking those broad, like you said, fast food buyers or whatever, and then targeting like fast food as an interest, and putting a bunch of those really big ones in a campaign budget optimization campaign on Facebook, and targeting those and seeing like what happens as a way to scale.
We do the exact same thing. I mean, we test through all those in-market segments, test them out on YouTube, and then trickle those down into Facebook.
It makes sense, right? And I think that there's, to some degree, like going broad in terms of targeting is helpful, like broad in terms of a big category like that. But also having more specific lookalikes and stuff is a good thing to add to the mix. One thing I want to shift into talking about with you, because I know that you have worked with a lot of agencies, and I think that D2C brands, there's just a lot of it depends. There's a lot of agencies that say certain things, and then there's D2C brands that are confused about how to work with an agency, or how to start to get into it. I think you said, were quoted in saying previously, that just needing help is not a reason for hiring an agency, and you shouldn't hire an agency if they're not going to help with your long-term business goal. And you went through and kind of outlined saying, before reaching out to an agency, kind of asking, understanding like what's your actual goal as a company, how's that agency going to actually help you in the next 1 to 2 years, what matters to your brand and leadership, so you can tell the agency, and then are you looking for a deal as the brand? Are you trying to go into this thinking about numbers out of the gate?
Yeah.
How do you, commenting on that, I'd be curious to your comments on those things, and then like how do people start to think about agency partnerships, and where do people go astray?
Wow, you nailed it in my quote. No, but I'm very guilty of this when I was earlier in my career, right? I think when you work for a brand, you often want to come in and look like you're saving the company money by busting an agency down on price, or right, only waiting to hire them until you have something you need to dump off your plate, right? And it's the complete opposite, backwards way to look at it. And I think now that I've worked with so many agencies, I realize that the results are just never there. You're going to get what you pay for. So I'm not saying you should overspend as a brand, but you should really be thinking about this in terms of, I'm going to, even if it's a 6-month contract, I like to think about it in terms of at least a year. Like, what can they help me with over the course of a year? And is it, does it align with the overall goals for your company? Most of the time, I hear people like, oh, I got to hire an agency, I'm so busy. It's just so wrong, right? Go hire a person to help you with that, because it's going to be cheaper than an agency anyway. Hire an agency for partnership, right? If you're at a brand and you don't have access to reps, right? You don't have access to Facebook or Google reps. An agency might be a great way for you to get access, but think about them in terms of like as a team member, as a partner. Most of the time when I'm on with our agencies and partners, I'm not sitting there waiting for them to tell me about performance because they've probably already sent in an email. I'm updating them on what's happening in our business, right? So they can do a better job. And I think so many agencies, I mean, you guys know, you're probably flying blind with some clients because you just don't know what's going on or you get blindsided with some big change they made. So I like to sort of work in terms of full trust.
Just to comment on that, one thing that I would really love Austin to comment on is that DNA of the relationship with an agency that you just said, right? Don't depend on them to be your leader. Like hire someone that's going to be in between. That's a more powerful hire. I learned that from Austin. That was something I sort of used to go, right? Like, oh, just go hire an agency, but actually having someone who's internal that's managing that. I mean, I realize that costs more money, but that person can have hold a lot of different hats, but that's going to be a more strategic investment, in my opinion. Even if you're trying to, let's say, get that person over time to do the work, you want them to be the one pulling the levers. Having them manage it first is going to be the best learning that they can do. And again, Austin, you're really the one that kind of taught me thinking of it in that way.
A lot of what you're talking about, Jesse, about long-term partnership is 100% the way to think about it. And it's challenging to try to figure out, especially when you're overwhelmed, what the right decision is. How do you guys structure your hybrid, like your team, so that you're not the one always connecting with agencies? How do you think about that interaction? And how does your team work with an agency, specifically maybe your team members connecting with them?
I like to do weekly calls to start, and then right over time you sort of scale that back to maybe no calls, maybe just a QBR or something, and you can communicate over email once trust is there. But I think it's important early for me and other people to be on the calls with agencies, just so they know sort of who the stakeholders are internally. But typically, like my team can handle any question, right, that a partner might throw at them. And so I hire for that. Like I'm not looking to hire super junior level marketers that to manage agencies, right? If they're not able to come into a call with an agency or with a partner and understand the scope of what's going on, then um, you know then I need to be there too until they are right until they get trained up. So luckily my team is unbelievable. They're fantastic, and I don't even need to be around most of the time. They're so good.
How do you guys operate? Is it remote? Is it in house? Is it a hybrid of both? Obviously, right now, most people have been remote,
Yeah,
but
we're all remote.
at a typical time, everyone's remote.
Well, just right now we are. I'm in Salt Lake City, and so our team is also here in Utah. And so, really, I mean, I want to hire the best marketers I can to come and work for Traeger, and I would certainly be open to hiring a remote marketer. But right now everyone is in house and in the same location, other than we're all working from home through the summer.
The one thing that you went through, Jesse, of kind of thinking about getting set up with an agency relationship. I think this is one thing that people sometimes don't know what to ask, and we get at Foxwell Digital, we get asked, many times, like, "Hey, what do you think of this agency?" You have you said, things like, where does a brand? This is things that you could ask a potential agency. Where does a brand of your size fit within their roster of clients? What will they deliver each week? Um, and for the entire term of the contract, how many clients is your agency rep managing? Are they yes men? Uh, what do they think of their goals? These are some of the things that you kind of bring up. And what are other things, or commenting on those, that you feel are imperative to ask a potential agency that you're trying to partner with?
I think also if they do creative in house, getting a look at some of the creative from clients they're currently running is a good thing, particularly on the Facebook ad side. But I mean, most of those, the biggest one for me has just been, where do we sit within the landscape of your current clients? Because having worked at bigger brands, I think often I've seen agencies really want to take on a Traeger or a Purple, right? Because they want to put that logo on their homepage, but you're not actually, they might take a rate reduction to do that or to be affiliated, but over time, right, that doesn't always work well for the brand. And I would almost rather, overpay for unbelievable agency talent than, than to work with someone I'm getting a deal with. And so, again, it goes back to what do I think this agency is going to bring to our digital team or our company within, a year's time. And that better be a good multiplier, right, for me to be able to sell it internally.
Do you have any of your experience working with different types of agencies? Are there any specific types of agencies that you find are more successful, have been more successful to like outsource versus parts of the business or channels that you like to keep in-house just for kind of specific reasons or from your experience?
Sure. I think that when you get to a certain level of spend, I think having some help we have a pretty big creative team at Traeger. But I think, as your spend levels increase, the need for different kinds of assets or asset testing increases. And so that can be a place where an agency can help. I also think that when you're in the initial setup phase of things, to save time, like if you didn't have a shopping feed at all, right, maybe an agency could help with that. And there are just certain things that you're going to find better expertise in different cities. Right now, I think we have a pretty strong programmatic knowledge base at Traeger. But I think as your spend levels increase, it's harder to find people who are experts at programmatic display and video within your local city, right? So you might have to take that out to an agency. So depending on spend. And I have like certain spend levels in my head, but like for most companies listening to this, I think, really just try to hire experts locally. It's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that if you can find people, initially as you start to build out a team, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think as your budget starts to get increasingly bigger, hiring someone that is a standalone individual sometimes can be helpful to kind of start to just be that little like puzzle piece that adds on, or like that little addition that adds on. And then over time building into a bigger agency that can do more. I love the conversation that we had too about agency red flags that you had, like, hey, if they're doing any of these things, this is a problem, which I think is important to go through, of like, they drop off the face of the earth, frequent account manager switch ups, lack of transparency, not asking enough questions, not bringing new strategies. I think those are some huge ones that are big red flags that people go through. As we kind of wrap up, Jesse, I'm thinking about, you're someone that observes closely the direct consumer space of brands that are smaller and all that are, brands like Traeger that are bigger. What are some final things that you want to impart, or we could call this Jesse's beefs, things you want to bring up that just bother you, that you see on happening in the conversation around D2C that you just want to call out and have a conversation about?
I think generally, like, you see a lot of D2C people on Twitter, they'll post their screenshot with no context. That's the number one thing that bothers me. Is like,
that's a good one.
I look at a screenshot and I'm like, I have 500 questions about this. I can't trust it. That's super annoying. I think also, just working with partners on the display and programmatic side, when I talk to either I'm consulting with someone or I talk to other brands and they don't know what their attribution windows are, or what their viewability rates are, or what their how many people are viewing their videos, and like they just don't have a sense for their own analytics, just the ROAS number. That is like hugely annoying to me. If they don't know like how many new people are actually viewing their content every month. And so it's often this mindset of like squeezing lemons, not planting lemon trees, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I always think of it too, like what you said. I mean, their lack of detail is like a glaring, their lack of awareness to the details is a glaring thing of like, how do you not know that about your own thing?
Right.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Jesse, it's been great to have you on the show. If people have further questions, is Twitter the best way to get a hold of you? And if so, what's your Twitter handle?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Jesse, Jessesem.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
Jesse, thank you so much.
I'd love to come back and just not record it and just talk about smoking ribs or something sometime.
All right, here we go. Well, it don't matter, you got money. You ain't got no soul.
Hey guys, it's Austin. And if you've been loving the podcast, you got to go check out brandgrowthexperts.com. That's where I work one-on-one with my clients to help them build faster growing, more profitable online stores. I've got coaching programs and workshops that we host all over the world. Would love to have you come check it out. If you're a fast growing e-commerce business or you want to be a fast growing e-commerce business, you got to check it out. That's the spot for you. We go more in depth than we do in the podcast with comprehensive trainings and coaching to help you scale up. Check it out, brandgrowthexperts.com. See you there.